I am Charmaine, 35 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward smirking. You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way. I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue at my mother Elaine's insistence, despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary in prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's, joined honor societies, and desperately tried to earn a single word of praise from Elaine. It never happened. My older sister Vanessa was the golden child. I was merely the dark sheep they tolerated. I eventually fled across the ocean to London. I built my own life in secret. They still believed I was just a struggling customer service worker. I kept my distance until yesterday morning. My phone vibrated violently on my desk in London. It was a text message from Elaine. There were no words attached. It was just a horrifying photograph. My beloved grandma was lying flat on a hospital bed. A thick plastic ventilator tube was shoved down her throat. Her eyes were closed. She looked pale and lifeless. Panic gripped my chest. Grandma was the only person who had ever shown me genuine love in that house. I dropped everything I was doing. I booked the first direct flight from London to Connecticut. I cried the entire 9 hours across the Atlantic Ocean. I did not even stop to change out of my wrinkled gray sweatpants and oversized travel hoodie. I dragged my heavy suitcase up the familiar brick driveway of the Fairfield estate. My heart pounded against my ribs as I threw open the heavy oak front doors. I expected to hear the rhythmic beeping of life support machines. I expected to smell sterile hospital sheets and see a hospice nurse. Instead, a loud blast of jazz music hit my face. I stood frozen in the grand foyer. The entire living room was decorated with cascading white roses and glittering string lights. Waiters in crisp black vests carried silver trays loaded with crystal champagne flutes. Dozens of wealthy guests in evening gowns and tailored suits laughed loudly. My mother Elaine stood at the center of the room. She wore a stunning emerald green cocktail dress. She held a glass of mimosa. She turned and spotted me standing by the door. She did not look like a grieving daughter. She looked utterly radiant. Elaine casually took a slow sip of her drink. She walked toward me with a cold smirk on her face. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. The music faded down slightly as people turned to stare at my messy appearance. "Where is she?" I demanded. My voice shook with exhaustion and terror. "Take me to Grandma right now." Elaine threw her head back and laughed loudly. The sound echoed through the massive room. "Oh, Charmaine, you always were so incredibly dramatic," she said smoothly. "She is completely fine. She is upstairs napping. The tube in that photograph was just a cheap piece of plastic I bought online. I needed a good enough bait to drag your stubborn body back from Europe." I knew you would not ignore a dying woman. My stomach violently dropped to the floor. The ventilator was a prop. The hospital bed was staged. It was all a cruel and elaborate lie just to force me to come home. Before I could even process the absolute pure evil of her deception, a tall man stepped out from the crowd. It was Preston. He was my sister Vanessa's white husband. Preston worked as a hedge fund manager and carried himself with an unbearable air of superiority. He always treated my family like a charity project he had generously taken on. Preston looked me up and down with deep disgust. He scoffed loudly at my stained hoodie and messy hair. "Welcome back, Charmaine," Preston mocked. His voice dripped with thick condescension. "You could have at least brushed your hair for your own engagement party." But then again, you people always do love to make a scene and overreact to everything. I clenched my fists. You people. The racial microaggression hung heavily in the air. Preston loved dropping those subtle insults to remind me of my place. You should be down on your knees thanking God right now, Preston continued. He took a sip of his bourbon. You ran away to London like a coward 5 years ago. You work a pathetic minimum wage job answering phones. Yet your wealthy cousin Marcus is still willing to marry you. He is going to give you a black credit card and a comfortable life. Most women would kill for this opportunity. Stop acting like a rebellious teenager and show some gratitude. I stared at him in pure disbelief. They had faked a medical emergency. They had weaponized my love for my grandmother. They threw a surprise engagement party to force me into a marriage with an abusive man I despised. I am not marrying Marcus, I said firmly. My voice was dangerously quiet. I am leaving. I turned around toward the heavy front doors, but two massive armed bodyguards suddenly blocked my exit completely. The men stood like stone statues. Their dark suits bulged over thick muscles. I took a step back. The air in the room suddenly felt thick and suffocating. The jazz music continued to play softly in the background. Someone started clapping slowly. The rhythmic sound cut through the murmurs of the crowd. The crowd parted. Marcus walked right down the middle of the room. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. The heavy scent of his expensive designer cologne hit my nose before he even reached me. It was a suffocating mix of cedar and pure arrogance. He flashed a smile that did not reach his cold, dead eyes. Marcus had always been the golden boy of our extended family. He was a wealthy real estate developer who used his money to buy obedience. He stopped inches from my face. "Hello, my beautiful bride," he whispered. His voice was smooth but laced with a dangerous edge. Before I could back away, his hand shot out. His thick fingers wrapped around my wrist like a steel vise. I tried to yank my arm away, but his grip only tightened. He leaned in closer. His hot breath brushed against my ear. "You really thought you could just run away from me, Charmaine," he murmured. "You owe me for the 5 years I spent waiting. You embarrassed me in front of this entire family. Now it is time to pay your debt." "Let go of me," I hissed. I kicked at his shin, but the heavy fabric of my sweatpants softened the blow. He did not even flinch. He just smiled wider. He looked at me like I was a wild animal he was excited to break. Vanessa walked over and stood next to Preston. She swirled the champagne in her glass and sighed loudly. "Honestly, Charmaine, you are ruining the aesthetic of my party," Vanessa complained. "We hired a professional photographer and you look like you just rolled out of a dumpster. Stop fighting Marcus and just accept your blessing." I looked around the room at the dozens of guests. They were family friends, business partners, and church leaders. People I had known my entire life. Some of them looked away, avoiding my gaze. Most of them just stood there sipping their drinks and watching the spectacle with mild amusement. Not a single person stepped forward to help me. They were all paid by Elaine in one way or another. Elaine stepped right up to me. Her eyes were hard and calculating. "You are not going anywhere, Charmaine," she said sharply. "You are going to do exactly what you are told for once in your miserable life." With a sudden vicious movement, Elaine snatched my leather purse right off my shoulder. "Hey, give that back," I yelled. I lunged forward, but Marcus yanked my arm back so hard my shoulder popped. Elaine ignored me. She unzipped my bag and began digging through my personal belongings. She tossed my wallet onto a nearby table. She threw my makeup bag onto the marble floor. Finally, her manicured fingers pulled out the one item she was looking for, my dark blue United States passport. She held it up high in the air like a hunting trophy. A sickening smirk spread across her perfectly painted lips. "You always were a flight risk," Elaine sneered. She walked slowly toward the massive stone fireplace that dominated the far wall of the living room. The fire was roaring. The bright orange flames crackled and popped. I knew exactly what she was going to do. "No, please do not do this," I begged. My voice cracked with genuine panic. Without my passport, I was completely trapped. I could not board a flight back to London. I could not return to the life I had secretly built. Elaine stopped right in front of the flames. She turned to face the silent crowd. "We have a very important weekend ahead of us," Elaine announced loudly. "This Sunday we are going to finalize the estate transfer of the properties to the management fund. It is the only way to protect our family legacy, and immediately following the signing we will celebrate the beautiful legal union between Marcus and my prodigal daughter Charmaine. Until those documents are signed and the vows are exchanged, nobody is leaving this property, especially the bride." Elaine looked right into my eyes. Then she casually tossed my passport directly into the roaring fire. I screamed. I tried to break free from Marcus, but the bodyguards grabbed my other arm. I watched in absolute horror as the thick blue booklet landed right on top of the burning logs. The edges curled instantly. The gold foil lettering melted away. The pages caught fire and curled into black ash. My ticket to freedom was completely destroyed in seconds. Elaine dusted her hands off. She picked up her mimosa from a nearby table. "Take her upstairs to her room," Elaine commanded. "Make sure she stays there." Marcus let go of my wrist. The guards hooked their hands under my arms and lifted me off the floor. I kicked and screamed. "Let me go, you monsters," I yelled. The guests turned their backs and resumed polite conversations. The music drowned out my voice. The guards dragged me up the grand staircase. My sneakers dragged against the carpet. We reached the second floor. They hauled me down the long corridor. They shoved open the heavy wooden door of my old childhood bedroom, the one painted that sickening pale blue color. They threw me inside. I crashed onto the floor. Before I could scramble to my feet, the door slammed shut. I heard the deadbolt locking from the outside. I ran and pounded my fists against the thick wood. It was useless. I was locked inside my own personal prison. I had no passport and no way out. But they made one mistake. They completely forgot my pockets. Inside my left pocket was a simple black metal hairpin. During my early years building a crisis management firm in London, I learned a lot of unconventional skills. Dealing with hostile corporate takeovers sometimes required knowing how to physically bypass locked doors. I waited in the dark until the heavy bass of the party music downstairs finally stopped. The house fell completely silent around midnight. I pulled the hairpin from my pocket and bent the metal straight. I knelt on the carpet and pressed my ear against the cool wood of the door. I slid the metal pin into the old brass keyhole. It only took me 40 seconds to feel the internal tumblers click into place. The deadbolt slid back with a soft thud. I opened the door just a fraction of an inch and peeked out into the dark hallway. The security guards were gone. Elaine probably thought locking me in was enough. I slipped out of the room and crept barefoot down the corridor. I did not head for the front door. My passport was ashes and Marcus had likely stationed his men outside the perimeter anyway. I needed to see Grandma. I had to know the truth about her condition. I bypassed the main staircase and moved toward the servant quarters. There was a hidden wooden door that led directly down into the basement. The air grew colder and smelled of damp earth as I descended the narrow wooden steps. The basement of the Fairfield estate was massive, but only one small corner was illuminated by a harsh fluorescent light. I stepped off the last stair and walked toward the light. What I saw made my blood run entirely cold. Grandma was not in a hospital. She was not dying of natural causes. She was lying on a cheap rented medical bed pushed against the damp concrete wall. There was no ventilator. There were no life support machines. She was just sleeping heavily. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, unnatural rhythm. I ran to her side and grabbed her fragile hand. Her skin was freezing. "Grandma," I whispered. "Wake up. Please wake up." She did not even stir. Her eyelids fluttered slightly, but she remained completely unresponsive. I looked around the makeshift room. On a small metal tray next to the bed, I spotted 4 orange prescription bottles. I picked them up and read the labels. Lorazepam, haloperidol, strong antipsychotics, and heavy chemical sedatives. None of these were prescribed for a heart condition or old age. The labels had Elaine's name on them as the authorized caregiver. The sickening reality hit me like a physical punch to the gut. Elaine was purposely overdosing her own mother with tranquilizers. She was keeping Grandma in a chemically induced coma. I remembered what Elaine had announced to the party guests upstairs. She mentioned signing the estate transfer documents this Sunday. It all made perfect sense now. Grandma owned the entire Fairfield estate and 300 acres of prime commercial real estate surrounding it. She had always refused to sell. Elaine could not legally touch the property unless Grandma was declared medically incompetent. By keeping her drugged and hidden in the basement, Elaine was staging a complete legal takeover of the family wealth. I quickly pulled out my secondary burner phone, which I always kept hidden in my bra for emergencies. I snapped clear photographs of every single prescription bottle, the labels, and Grandma lying unconscious on the bed. I needed evidence. Just as I lowered my phone, a sharp voice echoed through the cold basement. "Well, look who finally decided to join the real world." I spun around. My sister Vanessa was standing at the bottom of the staircase. She had changed out of her cocktail dress and was wearing silk designer pajamas. She held a glass of red wine in her hand. She did not look surprised to see me out of my room. She just looked deeply annoyed. "What are you doing down here, Vanessa?" I demanded. I pointed to the pill bottles. "Look at what Elaine is doing. She is poisoning Grandma. We have to call an ambulance right now." Vanessa rolled her eyes and took a slow sip of her wine. "Oh, please, Charmaine, stop being so dramatic. Nobody is poisoning anyone. Mom is just keeping her calm until the paperwork clears on Sunday." I stared at my sister in absolute horror. "You know about this?" I asked. My voice trembled with rage. "You know our mother is illegally drugging our grandmother and keeping her locked in a basement, and you are just okay with it." Vanessa walked closer and leaned against the concrete wall. "Do you have any idea how much debt Preston and I are in right now?" she snapped. "The hedge fund is bleeding money. We owe millions. If Grandma does not sign over that land by the end of the weekend, we will lose everything. My house, my cars, my country club membership, all of it. Grandma is 80 years old, Charmaine. She does not need all that money. I do. I felt physically sick. You are willing to kill her for a lifestyle?" I asked. "She is not going to die," Vanessa sighed with deep irritation. "Once Preston gets the land and Marcus pays the $5 million dowry for marrying you, Mom will put Grandma in a nice nursing home. Everybody wins. Well, except you. But honestly, you brought this on yourself by running away. Now put those bottles down and go back upstairs before I call Marcus down here to drag you back by your hair." I stood my ground for a brief second. My sadness evaporated instantly. It was replaced by a cold, calculating fury. I looked closely at Vanessa's extremely smug, entitled face under the harsh, bright lights. I realized then that I had absolutely no family left in this world. They were nothing more than ruthless, greedy, dangerous little financial monsters and parasites. "I am done explaining this to you, Charmaine." Vanessa sighed. "You are clearly too emotional to understand basic economics. I am texting Marcus right now. He can come down here and drag you back to your room himself." If Marcus came down, he would confiscate my phone. I needed her to feel powerful, so I gave her exactly what she wanted. "Please, no," I cried out. I dropped to my knees on the floor. "Vanessa, please do not call him. He hurt my arm earlier. Do not let him come down here." Vanessa stopped typing. She looked down at me. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. Seeing me on my knees begging for her mercy was the ultimate high for her. She had spent her entire life competing with me. Now she finally had me completely broken at her feet. I forced myself to sob loudly. "I promise I will not say anything." I gasped. "I will marry Marcus. Just keep him away tonight. I am so scared." "You are right. I am just a stupid call center worker. I do not know anything about money. Please, just let me sleep." "Look at you," Vanessa sneered. "You thought you were so brave running to Europe. You thought you were better than us, and now look where you are, crying on a basement floor in cheap sweatpants. You always were pathetic." "Fine," she said dismissively. "I am not going to ruin my beauty sleep. Go back to your room before I change my mind. Keep your mouth shut. If you say one word about Grandma, I will make sure Marcus makes your life a living hell." Vanessa walked up the wooden stairs. The heavy door clicked shut behind her. Then the lock turned. I stayed on the floor for 10 more seconds. Then I stopped crying. The tears vanished instantly. I stood up and dusted the dirt off my knees. My face went completely deadpan. The pathetic, terrified little sister was gone. The CEO had returned. I reached up to my right ear and unclasped my pearl earring. It was not a piece of jewelry. It was a custom-built micro-encrypted communication device. It operated on a secure satellite frequency that could not be traced. I pressed the tiny button hidden on the back of the pearl and placed it inside my ear. A soft electronic chime sounded, followed immediately by a crisp British accent. "Good evening, Madam CEO," the voice said. "It was Arthur, my chief of operations in London. We noticed your primary phone went offline 4 hours ago. Are you in danger?" "No," I replied coldly. "But I am currently standing in a basement where my family is illegally holding my grandmother hostage under heavy sedation. They burned my passport. They are forcing me into an arranged marriage with Marcus tomorrow to pay off Preston's massive hedge fund debt. They plan to steal the entire Fairfield estate by Sunday." There was a brief pause on the line. Then Arthur spoke again. His tone was dead serious. "Understood, madam. What are your orders?" "Initiate Operation Bloodline," I commanded. "I am going to tear their entire lives apart brick by brick. First, I need you to dig into Preston's hedge fund. Vanessa said they owe millions. I want to know exactly who they owe and how much. Find every hidden account, every shell company, and every offshore wire transfer." "Consider it done," Arthur said. "What about Marcus?" "Audit all of his real estate development companies," I instructed. "A man like Marcus does not make his money clean. Look for money laundering, tax evasion, and fraudulent contracts. I want his financial throat cut by Sunday morning. Buy up any debt he owes. I want our firm to be the majority holder of his liabilities." "And your mother?" Elaine, Arthur asked. "Find the judge who signed the temporary medical guardianship," I said. "Trace the money. I want her backed into a legal corner she can never escape. And Arthur, I need you to book a private medical evacuation helicopter. Have it on standby near the Fairfield estate. When I am done with them, I am bringing Grandma back to London with me. She will get the best medical care available. The helicopter will be fueled and waiting." Arthur confirmed. "Our legal team is already mobilizing. We will have the financial dossiers ready for you by tomorrow evening. Do you need a physical extraction team sent to the house now?" "No," I said smoothly. I looked around the dark, damp basement. Let them think they have won. Let them dress me up and parade me around tomorrow. I want them to feel incredibly powerful. I want them to stand at the altar on Sunday thinking they are about to become multimillionaires. The higher they climb, the harder they are going to fall. "Understood," Arthur said. "We will monitor your audio feed through the earpiece. Happy hunting, Charmaine." The line disconnected. I slipped the pearl earring back onto my earlobe. I looked down at Grandma one last time. I kissed her cold forehead. "Hang on just a little bit longer, Big Mama," I whispered. "I am going to fix this. I promise." I quietly climbed the wooden stairs. I slipped the hairpin back into the lock and opened the door. I sneaked down the dark corridor and returned to my childhood bedroom. I locked the door from the inside and sat on the edge of the bed. I did not sleep a single wink that night. I sat in the dark, staring at the wall, running through every single possible variable of the upcoming weekend. When the sun finally began to rise over the Connecticut hills, my plan was completely flawless. They thought they had trapped a scared little girl. They did not realize they had just locked themselves inside a cage with an apex predator. Today was Friday. By Sunday afternoon, my entire toxic family would be completely destroyed. At exactly 8 in the morning, the heavy lock on my bedroom door clicked open. A maid stepped inside and handed me a set of clean clothes. They were cheap, plain garments meant to make me look completely submissive. I put them on without a single word of complaint. I walked downstairs to the formal dining room. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and roasted bacon filled the air. The long mahogany table was set with fine china and polished silver. Elaine sat at the head of the table sipping espresso. Vanessa was busy scrolling through her phone while eating a bowl of fresh fruit. Preston sat across from them wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit. He looked like a man who believed he owned the entire world. I took a seat at the far end of the table. No one bothered to say good morning. Before I could even reach for a glass of water, Preston tossed a thick stack of papers down the length of the table. The heavy document slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of my plate. It was at least 50 pages thick and bound with a thick black clip. I looked down at the bold print on the cover page. It was an irrevocable estate transfer agreement. Preston leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. He looked at me with the kind of exasperated patience a teacher uses on a very slow student. "Listen to me carefully, Charmaine," he began. "I am going to explain this using very simple words so you can understand. Our family is currently facing some minor liquidity issues. To protect our assets, we are restructuring the estate of Grandma. That document in front of you transfers total control of her 300 acres and the house into my private wealth management fund. It is the only way to save this family from complete bankruptcy." I flipped through the dense legal jargon. "You are stealing her land," I said flatly. "You are moving her property into a fund that you exclusively control." Preston sighed heavily and rubbed his temples. He looked over at Elaine. "See, this is exactly why we did not want to involve her," he complained. "She has absolutely no understanding of high-level finance. Charmaine, this is not stealing. It is aggressive wealth preservation. I am taking on the massive burden of managing this estate because you and your mother are completely incapable of doing so. You should be thanking me for stepping up." Elaine set her espresso cup down with a sharp clink. "Preston is doing us a massive favor, Charmaine," she said sharply. "But you would not understand loyalty or sacrifice. You have always been the problem child of this family. The dark sheep who never contributed a single useful thing to our lives." Elaine pointed an accusing finger at me. "Look at your sister Vanessa. She married a brilliant financial mind. She volunteers at the country club. She brings pride and prestige to our family name. What have you ever done? You ran away to London to work a pathetic entry-level job answering telephones. You left me to handle the burden of caring for your sick grandmother all by myself. Now when we finally need you to do your part, you sit there and question the men who are trying to save us. You are ungrateful and selfish." I stared at Elaine. The sheer audacity of her lies was breathtaking. She was the one who had locked her own mother in a cold, damp basement on a diet of heavy chemical sedatives. Yet she sat there in her designer clothes playing the role of the exhausted, heroic caregiver. "I know exactly how you are caring for Grandma," I said quietly. "I saw her last night, Elaine." The dining room went completely silent. Vanessa stopped scrolling on her phone. Elaine froze mid-reach for her coffee cup. The color drained slightly from her face. Preston was the first to react. He stood up from his chair and walked slowly around the large mahogany table. He stopped right behind my chair. He leaned down so his face was inches from my ear. I could smell the strong mint on his breath. "Listen to me, you pathetic little girl," Preston whispered. His voice was completely devoid of its usual arrogant charm. It was cold and deadly. "You think you have some sort of moral high ground here, but you have absolutely nothing. You have no money, you have no passport, you have no power. Here is exactly what is going to happen. You are going to sign that document right now as a legal witness. Then tomorrow you are going to put on a nice dress and you are going to marry Marcus." I gripped the edge of the table. "And why would I ever do that?" I asked. Preston chuckled softly. "Because Marcus is paying my hedge fund $5 million for the privilege of marrying you," he sneered. "And if that money does not hit my account by Monday morning, I will lose my firm. I will not let you ruin my life. So if you refuse to cooperate, or if you try to tell anyone about the medication Elaine is giving the old lady, I will make a phone call. I know the director of a state-run mental ward 2 towns over. It is a horrific, underfunded nightmare facility. They put violent patients in the same rooms as the elderly. If you do not agree to this marriage right now, I will have Grandma transferred to that ward by midnight. She will not survive a week in there." Preston stood back up and tapped the thick stack of papers on the table. Do we have a deal, Charmaine? I looked down at the thick legal document, then up at his extremely smug face. Every single piece of this trap was perfectly set. I nodded my head slowly. I let my shoulders slump forward. I looked down and forced a single fake tear down my cheek. Fine, I whispered back. My voice was very shaky. You finally win, Preston. I will sign the legal papers and marry Marcus. Just please do not send Grandma to that facility. Preston smiled. He patted my head like a compliant dog. Good girl, Charmaine, he said smoothly. I knew you would see reason. The documents will be finalized tomorrow before church. The wedding will happen immediately after the service. Elaine sighed. Thank goodness we can put this drama behind us, she said. Go wash your face. You look dreadful. If I am marrying Marcus in front of the congregation tomorrow, I cannot wear sweatpants, I said quietly. I need a proper dress for the gala. I do not want to embarrass the family anymore. Elaine looked at me and nodded approvingly. Finally, a shred of common sense, she said. Vanessa, take your sister into town and buy her something presentable. Nothing too flashy, just something that makes her look like a respectable bride. Vanessa groaned. Do I have to? She complained. I have a massage scheduled at noon. Take her, Vanessa Preston commanded firmly. Put it on the black card. Consider it a business expense. Fine, Vanessa snapped. Let us go, Charmaine. Do not embarrass me. An hour later, I sat in Vanessa's Porsche. We drove into the expensive retail district. Vanessa parked in front of an exclusive bridal shop. The mannequins in the window wore silk gowns that cost more than most people made in a year. We walked inside. A saleswoman offered us water, but Vanessa waved her away. We need a dress for my sister, Vanessa said loudly. She looked at me with disgust. She is getting married tomorrow, but we need something off the rack. She does not have the figure for custom couture. The saleswoman nodded politely and began pulling gowns from the racks. For the next 2 hours, Vanessa forced me to try on the most unflattering dresses in the store. She picked out heavy fabrics with high collars and dull colors. Every time I stepped out of the fitting room, she found a new way to insult me. That one makes your hips look massive, Vanessa sneered from her chair. And that pale yellow color washes out your skin. It is a shame you do not take better care of yourself. Look at me. I still fit into my designer jeans from college. I stood in front of the large 3-way mirror, wearing a terrible ruffled gown. You do look great, Vanessa, I said calmly. Playing the subservient sister was exhausting but necessary. Of course I do, Vanessa bragged. She took a sip of water. It is easy to look good when your husband provides everything. Preston is a financial genius managing accounts for the wealthiest families. He just bought me a diamond tennis bracelet. We are closing on a house in the Hamptons next month. Pay attention to how Marcus treats you, Charmaine. If you just do what he says, you might actually have a comfortable life. I turned back to the mirror. Vanessa had absolutely no idea that her perfect life was built on a massive house of cards. She actually believed Preston was a successful businessman. She thought her country club memberships and designer bags were paid for by hard work and intelligence. I stepped back into the private fitting room and pulled the heavy curtain completely shut. As I reached for the zipper on the back of the gown, I felt a sharp vibration against my ribcage. It was the hidden burner phone tucked securely inside my bra. I quickly pulled the phone out and unlocked the screen. There was a new encrypted text message from Arthur in London. I read the glowing words in the dim light of the fitting room. The audit is complete, Madam CEO. Preston's fund is entirely fraudulent. He is currently short $10 million. We traced the missing funds. He has been embezzling money from the church pension fund for 3 years. He used the stolen retirement money to cover terrible stock bets and fund his luxury lifestyle. We have all wire transfer receipts. He is completely broke. I stared at the screen. The magnitude of his crime was staggering. He had stolen the retirement savings of the elderly church members, the very same church where we were supposed to hold the gala tomorrow. He was robbing the people who trusted him the most. I locked the phone and tucked it safely back into its hiding spot. I unzipped the ugly ruffled gown and let it pool around my ankles on the floor. I grabbed a simple, elegant white silk dress from the rack and slipped it on. It fit perfectly. I pulled back the heavy curtain and walked out into the main showroom. Vanessa was busy looking at her reflection in a hand mirror, checking her perfect makeup. "I'm going to get this one," I said quietly. Vanessa frowned. "It is a bit plain," she criticized. "But whatever. It does not really matter what you wear. People will only be looking at Marcus anyway. Let us just pay and go. I am already late for my massage." Vanessa walked up to the register and handed the cashier Preston's black credit card. I stood behind her and looked at our reflection in the large mirror behind the counter. Vanessa looked so incredibly proud and arrogant. She believed she was untouchable. She believed she was better than me in every single way. I looked at her reflection and smiled. "Enjoy your massage, Vanessa," I thought to myself. "Enjoy your shiny silver Porsche and your expensive tennis bracelets. Enjoy the illusion of your perfect wealthy life for just one more day. Because tomorrow morning, the world will find out your husband is a common thief, and you are completely bankrupt." By the time we returned, the sun was setting. Elaine spared absolutely no expense. She rented the grand ballroom of the local country club. The room was already packed with wealthy guests and church elders. I wore a tight, uncomfortable red dress that Marcus specifically requested. It made me feel like property on display. I stood quietly in the corner sipping water and watching the crowd. Marcus was holding court near the open bar. He was surrounded by a group of his real estate developer friends. They were all loud, arrogant men who wore expensive watches and treated women like trophies. Marcus was drinking heavily. I watched him swallow his fourth glass of whiskey in under an hour. His face was flushed and his laughter was sharp and aggressive. He kept pointing in my direction and whispering things to his friends, making them erupt into loud, obnoxious laughter. I tried to make myself as small as possible, but there was no escaping him tonight. Suddenly, Marcus slammed his empty glass onto the bar. He marched straight across the ballroom floor toward me. His friends followed close behind him like a pack of hungry wolves. People stepped out of their way, sensing the aggressive energy radiating from him. Marcus stopped right in front of me. He smelled strongly of alcohol and expensive cigars. He did not say a single word to me. Instead, he reached out and grabbed my upper arm. His thick fingers dug deeply into my bare skin. He yanked me forward so hard I almost lost my balance and fell directly into his chest. "Look at her, boys," Marcus announced loudly. His voice carried over the sound of the live jazz band. The music seemed to quiet down as people turned to watch the spectacle. "She thinks she is so smart running off to London to answer phones. She thought she could escape the family, but she came crawling right back, and tomorrow she becomes legally mine." His friends cheered and raised their glasses in a toast. One of them patted Marcus on the back. "She looks a little rebellious to me, man," the friend joked. "Are you sure you can handle that kind of attitude?" Marcus laughed loudly and tightened his grip on my arm. My skin burned under his heavy hand. "Oh, I can handle her just fine," Marcus sneered. His eyes were cold and dark as he looked down at me. "Women like Charmaine just need to learn their proper place. Once we are married, I am going to tame her completely. She will forget all about her stupid little independent life in Europe. She will stay home and do exactly what I tell her to do. Is that not right, sweetheart?" He pulled me closer, trying to force me to lean against him. The sheer disgust I felt was overwhelming. I could not play the submissive pawn in that specific moment. It was too humiliating. I planted my feet firmly on the carpet and yanked my arm backward with all my strength. "Let go of me, Marcus," I said sharply. My voice was loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear clearly. "You are drunk and you are hurting me. Get your hands off me right now." The music abruptly stopped. The ballroom fell completely silent. Dozens of eyes stared at us. Marcus looked genuinely shocked for a fraction of a second before his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He raised his hand as if he was going to strike me right there in front of everyone. Before he could swing, Elaine pushed her way through the crowd. She wore a stunning black evening gown and looked absolutely furious. She did not yell at Marcus for grabbing me. She did not tell his friends to back off. Instead, she marched right up to me and raised her own hand. A sharp cracking sound echoed through the silent ballroom. Elaine slapped me directly across the face with all her strength. The force of the blow snapped my head to the side. My cheek burned intensely and my vision blurred for a brief moment. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of wealthy guests. "How dare you cause a scene like this?" Elaine hissed. Her voice was trembling with absolute rage. She stepped closer, pointing her finger right in my face. "You are an ungrateful, wretched girl. Marcus is your future husband. He is your provider. He is paying $5 million to save this family from financial ruin because you were too selfish to ever contribute a single dime. You will treat him with the absolute utmost respect. You will apologize to him right now, or so help me God, I will make you regret you were ever born." Preston and Vanessa stood a few feet away, watching the entire scene with smug smiles. They loved seeing me humiliated in public. They thought I was completely broken. They thought the slap would force me to fall to my knees and beg for forgiveness. I slowly turned my head back to look at Elaine. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not raise my hand to defend myself. I calmly raised my fingers and gently touched my burning cheek. The pain was sharp, but it grounded me. It reminded me exactly why I was going to destroy them all. I looked Elaine dead in the eyes. I let a slow, cold, and completely confident smile spread across my face. The absolute lack of fear in my expression made her falter. Her hand slowly dropped to her side. "I am not apologizing to anyone," I said softly. My voice was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the room it carried perfectly. Elaine frowned deeply. "What did you just say to me?" she demanded. I stepped slightly closer to her. My posture was perfectly straight. I dropped the terrified victim act completely. "I said, enjoy your large, beautiful house, Mother," I whispered smoothly. "Enjoy your fancy parties and your very expensive new dresses. Enjoy every single second of it while it is still yours." Elaine stared at me in complete confusion. Her brow furrowed and her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The absolute certainty in my voice completely unnerved her. She looked over at Preston, seeking some sort of explanation, but he looked just as confused as she did. I turned my back on all of them and slowly walked out of the silent ballroom, leaving them completely terrified of what tomorrow morning would finally bring. I walked back up the grand staircase and returned to my childhood bedroom. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me and leaned against it for a very long moment. The silence of the room was a stark contrast to the loud jazz music and fake laughter still echoing from the country club downstairs. My cheeks still throbbed slightly from where Elaine had struck me, but the physical pain meant absolutely nothing to me now. I walked over to the small antique desk sitting near the window and opened my secured laptop. It was nearly midnight and time to work. A soft chime indicated a new encrypted email had arrived in my hidden inbox. Arthur had delivered exactly as he promised. The subject line simply read, "Operation Bloodline Final Dossiers." I clicked open the attached compressed files, and my screen instantly filled with a massive mountain of undeniable legal and financial evidence. It was everything I needed to completely destroy the monsters living in this house. First, I opened the financial records belonging to Preston. His elite hedge fund was a complete and utter illusion. The bank documents showed a long, undeniable trail of highly aggressive corporate financial wire fraud. Preston had systematically drained the retirement savings accounts of over 50 elderly members of our local church congregation. He had funneled the stolen pension money through various shell companies located in the Cayman Islands. He used those stolen funds to cover his own massive stock market losses and to finance the lavish luxury lifestyle Vanessa loved to brag about daily. Next, I opened the folder containing the audit of Marcus and his real estate development empire. Just as I suspected, his business was nothing but a highly sophisticated money laundering operation. The financial ledgers Arthur retrieved proved everything perfectly clear. Marcus was using his large construction projects to wash dirty cash for a violent criminal syndicate operating out of Miami. The federal authorities had been quietly investigating his shell companies for over 2 years, but Arthur had somehow managed to secure the deleted offshore ledgers that Marcus thought were permanently erased. Marcus was not just a rich bully. He was a federal criminal facing decades in prison. Finally, I opened the investigative report regarding my mother Elaine. Arthur had successfully tracked down the crooked local judge who signed the temporary medical guardianship order giving Elaine total legal control over Grandma. The attached bank records showed a direct electronic transfer of exactly $50,000 from Elaine's personal checking account to a secret offshore trust fund owned by that specific judge. The transfer occurred just 3 days before Grandma was suddenly locked down in the dark basement and heavily sedated daily. It was a clear-cut, documented case of judicial bribery, medical fraud, and severe elder abuse. I spent the next 3 hours working in complete silence. I carefully printed every single page of the damning evidence using a small wireless printer I had quietly removed from the home office earlier. I arranged the freshly printed documents meticulously into 3 pristine red presentation folders. One red folder was designated specifically for Preston. One red folder was exclusively for Marcus. The final red folder was prepared carefully for Elaine. Each folder was a loaded weapon just waiting to be fired in front of a massive audience. After securing the 3 red folders inside the false bottom of my suitcase, I pulled out my burner phone. I dialed the emergency medical evacuation service that Arthur had already placed on active standby. A professional dispatcher answered the secure line immediately without any long delay. I gave them the exact global positioning coordinates of the Fairfield estate and instructed them to be ready for a rapid medical extraction at exactly noon tomorrow. They confirmed the private helicopter was fully fueled and a specialized trauma team was thoroughly briefed on the heavy sedatives Grandma was currently being forced to take. Just as I ended the call and deleted the dial history, a sharp, aggressive knock echoed loudly on my bedroom door. "Charmaine, open up right now," Preston ordered from the dark hallway. I quickly slid the burner phone under my mattress and unlocked the heavy door. Preston stood in the doorway looking incredibly smug and arrogant. He had taken off his suit jacket and his tie was loosened around his neck. He reached into his tailored trouser pocket and pulled out a small black velvet jewelry box. He flipped the lid open and shoved it roughly toward my chest. Inside sat a cheap cubic zirconia ring that sparkled artificially in the dim light of the hallway. "Marcus told me to give this to you tonight," Preston sneered. His voice dripped with deep contempt. "He said he did not want to waste a real diamond on you. He said he refuses to spend money on a woman who still desperately needs to learn how to behave properly in public. Put it on your finger right now. And Charmaine, when you stand up in front of the entire church congregation tomorrow, you better force a smile and act incredibly grateful. You are very lucky we are even allowing you to still be a part of this wealthy family after the embarrassing stunt you pulled at the dinner tonight." I looked down at the fake cheap ring resting in the velvet box, and then I looked slowly straight upward. I looked directly into Preston's cold, arrogant blue eyes. I did not argue with him. I did not cry or show a single ounce of the fear he so desperately wanted to see. I slowly reached out my hand and took the velvet box directly from his fingers. I did not put the ring on. I simply closed the lid with a very sharp and final snap. "Oh, you really do not need to worry about my behavior tomorrow, Preston," I said softly as my eyes met his confused gaze. "Oh, tomorrow will be a day of absolute reckoning, Preston." Sunday morning arrived with a heavy, suffocating heat. Before I could even put on the simple white silk dress I purchased, Elaine barged into my room. She carried a massive garment bag. She took one look at my white dress and threw it into the hallway. "You are not wearing that cheap modern trash," she snapped. "You will wear your great-aunt's vintage bridal gown. It represents family tradition and submission." She forced me into a heavy, high-collared lace monstrosity that smelled like mothballs and stale perfume. The sleeves puffed out awkwardly at the shoulders and the thick fabric scratched my skin. It was deliberately garish and outdated. Elaine wanted me to look completely ridiculous and subservient next to Marcus in his custom Italian tuxedo. I did not fight her. I just stared at my reflection in the mirror and thought about the red folders currently hidden inside my bag. We arrived at the grand banquet hall of the megachurch just before noon. The parking lot was filled with luxury vehicles. The hall itself was decorated like a royal palace. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings. 300 guests were seated at round tables draped in gold silk. The entire high society of the city and the elite members of our church congregation were present. I stood near the heavy wooden doors at the back of the hall. I watched as Preston and Vanessa mingled with the city councilmen and wealthy investors. Vanessa wore a stunning diamond necklace that Preston probably bought using stolen retirement funds. Marcus stood near the front stage, laughing loudly with the church elders. He looked incredibly proud of himself. He thought he had completely won. The lights in the hall dimmed slightly, and a spotlight hit the center of the large stage. The soft murmur of 300 guests faded into complete silence. My mother Elaine stepped up to the crystal podium. She wore a sophisticated navy blue gown, and her hair was perfectly styled. She grabbed the microphone with both hands and looked out over the massive crowd. She took a deep breath and let a single perfect fake tear roll down her cheek. "Thank you all for being here on this deeply emotional day," Elaine began. Her voice trembled with practiced vulnerability. "Family is the most important blessing God gives us, but sometimes the devil tries to break those sacred bonds. For the past 5 years, my heart has been completely broken. My youngest daughter, Charmaine, wandered away from our righteous path. She was lost to the cold, unforgiving streets of Europe. She abandoned her faith, her family, and her responsibilities. She was a prodigal daughter living a life of utter ruin and spiritual decay." Elaine paused and wiped her eyes with a lace handkerchief. The crowd murmured in deep sympathy. Several older women in the front row nodded their heads in agreement. "But God is so incredibly merciful," Elaine continued. Her voice rose with dramatic passion. "He sent us strong, righteous men to guide her back to the light. My brilliant son-in-law Preston worked tirelessly to secure our family legacy and protect our estate. And the wonderful, generous Marcus stepped forward to offer Charmaine a second chance at redemption." Marcus looked past her flaws and her rebellious nature. He offered her his name, his protection, and his guidance. Today we are not just celebrating a marriage, we are celebrating the absolute salvation of a lost soul. We are bringing Charmaine back under the strict, loving authority of this family where she truly belongs. The crowd erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause. Preston smiled smugly and patted Marcus on the back. Vanessa wiped a fake tear from her eye. The sheer level of gaslighting was absolutely breathtaking. Elaine was standing in front of 300 people, claiming to be a devoted, loving mother saving her daughter. In reality, she was a monster who locked her own mother in a basement to steal her land and sell her child to a criminal to pay off debts. The applause eventually died down as the head pastor walked onto the stage. He was a tall, imposing man with a booming voice. He carried a thick leather binder containing the legal documents. He placed the binder carefully on a small wooden table in the center of the stage. Next to the binder, he placed an ornate gold pen. "Brothers and sisters," the pastor announced loudly, "before we proceed with the sacred vows of holy matrimony, we must handle the earthly responsibilities of this blessed union. As the spiritual leader of this congregation, I have been asked to officially witness the signing of the estate transfer and the marriage license." The pastor looked directly to the back of the hall where I was standing. The spotlight shifted and suddenly blinded me. 300 heads turned simultaneously to stare at me in my hideous vintage gown. "Charmaine," the pastor called out. His voice echoed heavily through the silent banquet hall. "Come forward right now. Step up to this stage and sign these documents. Embrace the beautiful forgiveness your wonderful family has so generously offered you today. Leave your sinful independence behind and submit to your new husband." I took a deep breath. I felt the heavy weight of the 3 red folders resting securely inside the large leather portfolio tucked under my arm. Every single eye in the room was fixed firmly on me. Marcus smirked and extended his hand toward me from the front row. Preston crossed his arms and nodded impatiently. Elaine watched me with cold, triumphant eyes from the podium. They were all waiting for me to break. They were waiting for me to surrender completely and sign my life away. I gripped the leather portfolio tightly and took my very first step down the long velvet aisle toward the stage. My moment of absolute revenge was finally here. I was finally and completely ready to destroy them all, right now. I reached the steps of the stage. The heavy fabric of the vintage dress dragged against the carpet. I walked up slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on the small wooden table, holding the thick leather binder. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning unit. I stepped up to the table. The pastor offered me an encouraging smile. "It is time to make things right, Charmaine," he said softly. I looked down at the marriage license and the estate transfer documents. My name was printed neatly on the dotted lines, waiting for my signature. I reached out and picked up the ornate gold pen. The metal felt cold against my fingers. Preston stepped up right behind me. He leaned in close. His breath brushed against my neck. "Sign it right now or the old lady goes to the asylum," he whispered viciously. "Do not test me, Charmaine. I will ruin her." I held the pen over the paper. The entire room held its breath. I let a long, painful second pass. Then I slowly placed the gold pen back down onto the table. I did not sign a single page. I turned away from the legal documents and stepped directly toward the microphone standing at the center of the podium. I grabbed the microphone with my right hand. "Before I sign over my grandmother's entire legacy, I just have one very simple question," I announced clearly. My voice echoed loudly off the vaulted ceilings, cutting through the suffocating tension. I turned to look directly at Preston. "I want to ask my brilliant brother-in-law something. Preston, how exactly does transferring my grandmother's land fix the $10 million deficit currently sitting in your Cayman Islands offshore account?" The entire banquet hall erupted in a sharp, collective gasp. It sounded like all 300 guests had suddenly had the wind knocked out of them. A heavy murmur rippled through the crowd. The older church members in the front rows turned to look at each other in utter confusion. Preston's smug, arrogant smile vanished instantly. His face went completely pale. His jaw dropped slightly, and his eyes widened in genuine shock. He took a small step backward. "What did you just say?" he stammered. His voice lacked any of its usual commanding confidence. I unzipped the heavy leather portfolio I was carrying under my arm. I pulled out the first pristine red folder. I held it up high for the entire room to see. I asked how stealing 300 acres of land is going to pay back the retirement money you have been embezzling from this very church congregation for the past 3 years, I repeated loudly. I opened the red folder and pulled out a stack of printed bank records. The papers rustled loudly in the microphone. "I have the wire transfer receipts right here, Preston. You drained the church pension fund to cover your own massive stock market losses. You are completely broke and you are a thief." The pastor rushed forward. His face was dark red with anger. "Charmaine, what kind of horrible lies are you spreading in the house of God?" he demanded. "Preston is a respected pillar of our community. He manages our funds with absolute integrity." Integrity. I laughed coldly. I turned to the pastor and handed him the stack of printed documents. "Look at page 4, Pastor. It details a transfer of exactly $2.5 million from the Church Widow Fund directly into Preston's personal shell company. He used the widow's money to buy Vanessa a new diamond tennis bracelet just yesterday." The pastor grabbed the papers. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the highlighted numbers. His hands began to shake violently. "Oh, my dear God," the pastor whispered. The microphone picked up his horrified voice and broadcasted it to the entire room. He looked up at Preston. His eyes were filled with absolute betrayal and fury. "Is this true, Preston? Did you steal our money?" "Did?" Preston panicked. He lunged toward the microphone. "She is lying," he yelled desperately. His face was sweating profusely. "She is a crazy, bitter woman. She forged those documents because she is jealous of my success. Do not listen to her. She is insane." I stood my ground perfectly still. I did not raise my voice. I did not act hysterical. I spoke with the calm, cold authority of someone who held all the cards. "I am not insane, Preston," I replied smoothly, "and I do not need to forge anything. I forwarded these exact same bank records to the Federal Financial Crimes Division 3 hours ago. They are currently freezing all of your domestic accounts as we speak." Vanessa stood up from her table in the front row. Her face was twisted in rage. "Shut your mouth, Charmaine," she screamed shrilly. "How dare you accuse my husband of stealing? You are just a pathetic broke loser who works at a call center. You know absolutely nothing about high finance." I turned my attention to my perfectly dressed older sister. "Oh, Vanessa," I sighed softly. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out the second red folder. "I am afraid you are the one who knows absolutely nothing about finance, especially your own." I opened the folder and pulled out another stack of documents. I held the papers out toward her. "I am not jealous of a woman whose designer lifestyle was entirely funded by stealing from elderly widows," I said clearly. "By the way, Vanessa, you might want to check your banking app right now. The IRS officially froze your joint checking accounts exactly 12 minutes ago. Your credit cards have all been declined. You do not own a single thing anymore." Vanessa laughed nervously, trying to play it off as a joke. "You are completely delusional," she scoffed. But I saw her hands trembling. She slowly reached into her designer clutch and pulled out her smartphone. She quickly opened her banking application. The entire room watched in dead silence as she stared at the glowing screen. Vanessa's face instantly drained of all color. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. Her perfectly manicured fingers began to shake violently. She dropped her phone directly onto the floor. The screen shattered loudly against the hard tile. She let out a horrifying, high-pitched scream and collapsed back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. She was utterly and completely bankrupt. Vanessa sobbing loudly in the front row was the final piece of proof the congregation needed. The shattered screen of her phone lay on the floor like a symbol of their destroyed empire. Preston realized immediately that his wife had completely validated my accusations. He panicked. He charged toward the stage, taking the carpeted steps 2 at a time. His face was bright red, and thick veins bulged against his tight white collar. "Give me that microphone right now, Charmaine," he ordered loudly. He lunged forward, trying to pry the heavy metal microphone directly from my hands. I easily stepped to the side, letting his own aggressive momentum carry him past me. He stumbled awkwardly and nearly fell right off the edge of the wooden podium. He spun quickly around and faced the shocked, angry crowd. He raised his hands in a desperate plea for absolute calm. "Do not listen to a single word this crazy, hysterical woman says," Preston shouted loudly, his voice cracked with sheer panic. "She is completely crazy. She has always been severely mentally unstable. Her own mother can verify that fact right now. I have given absolutely everything to this community. I brought financial literacy to this church. I uplifted you people when you had absolutely nothing. I am the only reason this congregation has a new roof and a functioning community center. I am your financial protector." His choice of words was a massive and fatal mistake. I uplifted you people. The racial microaggression echoed loudly through the silent banquet hall. The congregation of proud, hard-working Black families instantly stiffened in their seats. I walked back up to the podium and pulled a second thick stack of papers from the first red folder. I did not need to shout. The sheer weight of the absolute truth did all the heavy lifting for me. "You did not uplift anyone here, Preston," I said clearly into the microphone. "You parasitically fed on them for years. Let us look at the exact routing numbers, shall we?" I held the bank paper up to the bright stage lights. "On October 14th, you initiated a wire transfer using routing number 0420000013. You successfully moved $800,000 from the church retirement fund into a Cayman Islands account registered under your own personal name. 2 days later, you lost all $800,000 betting on a fraudulent offshore cryptocurrency startup. On November 2nd, you used routing number 091000022 to steal another $400,000. You used that money to immediately cover a massive margin call on your failing personal brokerage account. You literally stole the hard-earned life savings of Grandma Dorothy and Widow Jenkins just to pay for your own terrible gambling habits." I looked down at the front row where 5 senior church elders were sitting together. They were the most respected men and women in our entire community. They had trusted Preston blindly because he wore expensive tailored suits and spoke with loud, arrogant authority. Elder Thomas, a retired factory worker who had faithfully attended this church for 40 years, slowly stood up from his chair. His weathered face was a mask of cold, righteous fury. He looked at the printed paper shaking in the pastor's hands and then looked straight up at Preston. "Is it true?" Preston Elder Thomas asked. His voice was deep and rumbling like distant thunder. "Did you use routing number 0420000013 to empty our retirement accounts?" Preston began to sweat profusely under the hot stage lights. Large drops of perspiration rolled down his forehead and completely soaked the collar of his custom-tailored shirt. "Thomas, please. You have to understand the global market was incredibly volatile," Preston stammered. "I was just trying to generate a much higher yield for the congregation. It was a temporary liquidity maneuver to maximize your returns. I was going to put the money back as soon as the market corrected itself. I swear to you I was acting in your best financial interests." A loud chorus of angry shouts erupted from the back of the banquet hall. "Liar," someone yelled loudly. "Thief," another voice screamed in anger. Brother Jackson, another senior church elder, stood up and pointed a shaking, angry finger directly at Preston. "You sat in my living room and drank my sweet tea," Brother Jackson shouted. "You looked me right in the eye and told me my retirement was completely safe. You said you were a devoted man of God. You are nothing but a common criminal hiding behind a fancy college degree and a twisted white savior complex. You came into our sanctuary and robbed us completely blind." The entire board of elders stood up in unison. They began marching aggressively toward the stage. The grand illusion was completely shattered. The great white savior who constantly belittled our family and acted like a benevolent king was finally exposed as a desperate, pathetic fraud. Preston looked down at the angry, approaching crowd and physically shrank back. He backed away from the edge of the stage in total fear. His hands were trembling so violently he could not even button his suit jacket. He looked desperately over at Elaine, begging for help. "Elaine, please tell them to stop," Preston pleaded. "Tell them I am part of this family. Tell them about the new estate transfer documents. We can still fix this entire mess if she just signs the papers right now." But Elaine was completely frozen in her chair. She looked at Preston with pure, unadulterated disgust. In that exact moment, she realized he was completely useless to her. He had absolutely no money and no power left to offer. He was a rapidly sinking ship, and she had absolutely no intention of going down with him today. The furious crowd grew even louder, demanding immediate and harsh justice. The angry congregation continued to surge forward toward the stage. Their voices merged into a deafening roar of absolute betrayal. Preston cowered behind the wooden podium, completely paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing scream cut through the heavy chaos. It was Vanessa. She had snapped out of her initial state of shock. Her delusion and entitlement were simply too strong to let her accept the absolute reality of her complete financial ruin. She scrambled up from the floor and snatched her shattered smartphone off the carpet. She marched aggressively up the stage steps toward me. Her perfect makeup was smeared, and her expensive silk dress was wrinkled, but her eyes burned with pure, unhinged fury. "You hacked my bank accounts!" Vanessa shrieked loudly. She pointed her shaking finger directly at my face. "You hired some cheap European computer hacker to freeze my money just to embarrass me in front of our church. You have always been a jealous, broke loser, Charmaine. You are just a pathetic entry-level worker who cannot stand the fact that my husband is a brilliant financial manager. This is all a huge, ridiculous mistake. Preston is innocent, and he is going to sue you for everything you have." I looked at my older sister with a mixture of pity and intense disgust. She was standing in the middle of a massive stage, defending a man who had just stolen millions from the elderly people standing right in front of her. She cared absolutely nothing about the victims. She only cared about her designer bags and her country club status. I reached into my heavy leather portfolio and pulled out the second red folder. I had briefly shown it to her earlier, but she clearly needed to see the full, devastating extent of her complete ruin. "I am not a jealous, broke loser, Vanessa," I said calmly into the microphone. My voice easily overpowered her frantic screaming. "And I did not hack your bank accounts. The Internal Revenue Service seized your assets because your brilliant husband did not just steal from the church. He also committed massive tax fraud, and he used your personal signature to do it. I opened the red folder and pulled out a thick stack of official tax documents. I held them up for the entire congregation to see. Do you recognize these forms, Vanessa? I asked smoothly. These are federal business loan applications. For the past 4 years, Preston has been registering fake shell companies directly under your legal name. He claimed you were the sole owner and chief executive officer of 5 different real estate consulting firms. Vanessa stopped screaming. Her face contorted in deep confusion. What are you talking about? She stammered. I do not own any consulting firms. I am a dedicated housewife. Exactly, I replied coldly. But according to the federal government, you are a highly successful business owner who applied for and received over $3 million in fraudulent corporate relief loans. Preston forged your signature on every single document. Then he took that $3 million and transferred it to the Cayman Islands. He used your identity as a human shield, Vanessa. When the federal agents finally came looking for the missing money, they did not look at Preston. They looked directly at you. Vanessa turned slowly to look at Preston. He was still cowering near the podium, sweating profusely. Preston, she whispered. Her voice was trembling. Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not put my name on those illegal loans. Preston could not even look her in the eye. He stared down at the floor and swallowed hard. I had to do it, Vanessa, he muttered weakly. My credit was completely maxed out. I needed a clean name to secure the capital. We were going to lose the house. I was just trying to protect our lifestyle. I was trying to protect you. You did not protect her, I interrupted sharply. You completely destroyed her. I looked back at Vanessa, who was now shaking uncontrollably. You called me a broke loser, Vanessa. But the absolute truth is you are currently $3 million in federal debt. You are personally liable for every single fraudulent loan Preston took out. The government does not care that you were too busy getting massages and buying diamond tennis bracelets to read the documents your husband asked you to sign. They only care that your name is on the dotted line. No. Vanessa gasped. She grabbed her shattered phone again. Her fingers moved frantically across the cracked glass screen. This is a lie. I am calling my wealth concierge at the bank right now. They know exactly who I am. I am a platinum priority client. They will fix this immediately. She put the phone on speaker and held it up to her ear. The entire silent banquet hall listened to the phone ring twice before an automated voice answered. We are sorry, but the Platinum Priority account associated with this phone number has been officially suspended due to an active federal investigation. If you are calling regarding a frozen asset, please contact the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division directly. Goodbye. The line went dead with a sharp click. The automated message echoed loudly through the microphone on the stage. The absolute finality of the robotic voice completely shattered Vanessa's entire reality. Her perfect wealthy life was officially gone forever. She was not just broke, she was a massive federal liability facing potential prison time for corporate fraud. Vanessa let out a hollow, broken gasp. Her fingers went completely limp. The shattered phone slipped from her hand and crashed onto the wooden stage floor for the final time. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed right there on the stage in her expensive designer gown, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. The golden child of the family, the perfect daughter who spent her entire life looking down on me, was finally completely and utterly broken. The wailing sounds of my sister echoing across the wooden stage seemed to finally snap Marcus out of his arrogant daze. He had been standing near the front row watching his carefully constructed reality completely disintegrate in a matter of minutes. The $5 million dowry he was supposed to pay Preston was now trapped in a frozen federal account. The lucrative land transfer he desperately needed to launder his dirty money was officially dead. And the quiet, submissive bride he thought he had successfully bullied into complete obedience was standing at the podium, dismantling his entire world with absolute surgical precision. Marcus looked down at Vanessa sobbing on the floor, and then he looked directly up at me. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He let out a loud, primal roar of anger that echoed violently through the massive banquet hall. "You stupid, arrogant little girl," Marcus screamed at the top of his lungs. His voice was thick with venom and complete loss of control. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin my business? I will kill you myself." Marcus shoved a church elder out of his way and charged directly toward the stage steps. He moved with the terrifying speed and brute force of a cornered animal. Several women in the congregation screamed in absolute terror. The pastor took several steps backward, desperately trying to get out of the way. Preston was still cowering near the edge of the stage, completely useless. Marcus bounded up the wooden steps, his heavy leather shoes stomping loudly against the boards. He raised his massive right fist high into the air, fully intending to strike me directly in the face and completely destroy me right there in front of the entire church. He expected me to scream. He expected me to cower in fear and beg for mercy, just like I had pretended to do in the dark basement the night before. But I did not move a single inch. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I stood perfectly still behind the crystal podium and watched him charge at me with a completely bored expression on my face. Just as Marcus closed the final few feet between us, the heavy side door of the stage burst completely open. Two massive men dressed in sharp black tactical suits stepped out from the shadows of the wings. They moved with terrifying military precision. These were not the cheap hired thugs Marcus used to intimidate local contractors. These were elite private security contractors I had personally flown in from my London firm. They were highly trained professionals who specialized in extracting corporate executives from hostile environments. Before Marcus could even swing his heavy fist, the first contractor slammed directly into his side with the force of a speeding freight train. The heavy impact lifted Marcus completely off his feet. The air rushed out of his lungs in a loud, violent gasp. The second contractor grabbed Marcus by his expensive tailored jacket and slammed him face first into the hard wooden floor of the stage. The sickening crack of Marcus hitting the boards echoed loudly through the silent room. Both contractors immediately dropped their heavy knees directly onto his back, securely pinning him to the floor. One contractor grabbed his right arm and twisted it sharply behind his back, applying just enough painful pressure to keep him completely immobilized. The other contractor kept a firm, heavy hand pressed directly against the back of his neck, holding his face flush against the wood. Marcus groaned in extreme pain and struggled fiercely against their grip, but he was completely trapped. He looked absolutely pathetic, lying there in his custom Italian tuxedo gasping for air while my men held him down effortlessly. I calmly picked up my heavy leather portfolio and stepped slowly out from behind the crystal podium. The heavy fabric of the vintage lace gown brushed against the floor as I walked over to where Marcus was pinned. I looked down at his flushed, angry face pressed against the stage boards. He glared up at me, breathing heavily, his eyes wide with shock and pure rage. "Who the hell are you, Marcus?" hissed through clenched teeth. "You are just a pathetic broke call center worker. You cannot do this to me. I own half of this city." I let out a slow, soft laugh that carried perfectly through the microphone, still picking up sound from the podium nearby. "Did you really think a chief executive officer of a $500 million international crisis management firm would not run a thorough background check on the man trying to force her into a marriage?" I asked smoothly. The entire banquet hall gasped in absolute unison. The words hung in the air, completely shattering the false narrative Elaine had built for years. "I am not a call center worker, Marcus. I build and destroy massive corporations for a living. I hunt down financial predators just like you, and I completely tear them apart." Marcus stopped struggling. The color began to rapidly drain from his face as the sheer magnitude of his mistake finally registered in his mind. I crouched down slightly so I could look directly into his terrified eyes. "My firm hacked your supposedly secure servers 3 days ago, Marcus," I whispered coldly. "We found every single hidden ledger. We found the offshore accounts, the shell companies, and the detailed records of every single dollar you laundered for the Miami syndicate. And we did not just keep that information to ourselves. we packaged it very neatly and handed it directly to the federal authorities. The FBI has your offshore ledgers, Marcus. They have had them since yesterday morning. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut and let out a whimper of total defeat. His aggressive alpha male persona completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified criminal who knew his life was officially over. In fact, I added loudly, standing back up to my full height. The federal agents have been waiting outside this building for exactly 10 minutes. They wanted to let me finish my presentation before they moved in to make the official arrests. You are not going to marry anyone today, Marcus. You are going to a federal penitentiary for a very long time. The entire room remained frozen in a state of absolute shock. My mother Elaine finally snapped out of her paralyzed trance. She gripped the edges of the crystal podium so hard her knuckles turned completely white. She leaned forward and let out a piercing shriek that echoed violently across the silent room. "Stop lying right now," Charmaine Elaine screamed at the top of her lungs, her carefully crafted, elegant persona completely shattered, leaving behind a frantic, desperate woman. "You are nothing but a pathetic call center worker. You answer telephones for minimum wage in a tiny cubicle. You do not own a company, and you certainly do not have private security. This is all just a sick, elaborate prank to ruin your sister's perfect life and humiliate this family in front of our church." Elaine pointed a shaking finger down at Marcus, who was still pinned firmly to the stage floor by my contractors. "Let him up right now," Elaine commanded loudly. "I am calling the local police to have you arrested for assault and trespassing. You are a complete disgrace to this family, and I will not allow you to stand here and spout these ridiculous delusions. You have absolutely no money and no power. You are just a bitter, jealous little girl who wants to destroy everything we have worked so hard to build." I did not even bother to look at her. I simply kept my eyes fixed on the heavy double doors at the very back of the grand banquet hall. I knew exactly what was about to happen next. As if perfectly on cue, the massive wooden doors swung violently open with a loud, heavy thud. The bright afternoon sunlight spilled into the dim room, casting long, dramatic shadows down the center aisle. A large team of federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with large yellow letters printed across their backs stepped into the hall. They moved with absolute authority and purpose, instantly securing every single exit and perimeter wall. Walking directly in the center of the federal agents was my lead corporate attorney from London. His name was Julian, and he looked absolutely flawless. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal gray suit, polished leather Oxfords, and a crisp white shirt. He carried a sleek silver briefcase that held the final legal nails for the coffins of my family. Julian walked down the velvet aisle with the calm, confident stride of a man who commanded absolute respect in every single room he entered. The 300 guests sitting at the round tables quickly pushed their chairs back and scrambled out of his way. The congregation watched in terrified silence as the federal agents fanned out across the room. Several agents moved directly toward the front row where Vanessa was still sobbing on the carpet. They instructed her to remain exactly where she was. Two other agents flanked the stage steps, keeping a very close eye on Preston, who was now hyperventilating near the podium. Elaine watched Julian approach the stage with absolute confusion and growing horror. She stepped out from behind the podium and tried to block his path. "Excuse me," Elaine demanded loudly, her voice trembling with panic. "Who are you and what are you doing in my church? This is a private family event. You cannot just barge in here and interrupt a holy ceremony. I demand that you leave this building immediately before I press formal charges against all of you." Julian did not even break his stride. He did not look at Elaine or acknowledge her ridiculous demands. He simply walked right past her as if she was completely invisible. He climbed the wooden steps of the stage and walked directly over to where I was standing. The two elite private security contractors holding Marcus down looked up and nodded respectfully at Julian. The federal agents followed close behind, taking strategic positions all around the stage. The entire banquet hall was now under total federal control. Julian stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. He completely ignored the chaos, the sobbing and the screaming happening all around us. He stood perfectly straight and offered me a deep, formal bow of profound respect. The gesture was so incredibly formal and deliberate that it sent a massive shockwave of realization through the entire crowd. The church elders, the wealthy guests, and my deeply toxic family all stared in absolute disbelief. Julian opened his silver briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of finalized legal contracts bearing the heavy gold seals of the International Banking Authority. He held the documents out to me with both hands. Madam Chief Executive Officer Julian said clearly, his crisp British accent carrying perfectly through the microphone. I apologized for the slight delay. The final offshore banking hurdles were a bit tedious, but our hostile corporate acquisitions are now officially complete. I took the heavy stack of legal contracts from his hands and smiled slightly. Excellent work, Julian, I replied smoothly. Please inform the board of directors that the initial phase of our American expansion is proceeding exactly as planned. Julian nodded once. It is already done, madam, he stated loudly for the entire room to hear. We successfully purchased the outstanding debt portfolios from every single major creditor. The bank liens, the fraudulent federal loans, the unpaid mortgages, and the massive hedge fund deficits have all been consolidated under your direct exclusive ownership. Julian turned slowly and looked directly at Preston, Vanessa, Elaine, and Marcus. He looked back at me with a cold, calculating smile. You now officially own the absolute complete debt of every single person sitting at this table. The total absolute silence in the banquet hall was suddenly broken by the loud sound of Preston collapsing onto the hard wooden floor. He finally realized his entire life belonged entirely to me. I looked down at my mother and smiled. You always wanted me to contribute to this family, Elaine. I finally bought it all today. I stepped down from the wooden stage, leaving Elaine completely speechless behind the crystal podium. My heavy vintage dress swept across the floor as I walked slowly toward Preston. He was still kneeling on the carpet, struggling to breathe. His expensive gray suit was completely soaked in nervous sweat. He looked up at me with terrified, bloodshot eyes. I began to walk in a slow, deliberate circle around him like a predator finally cornering its wounded prey. Preston, you have spent the last 5 years lecturing me about the complex world of high finance, I said softly. My voice was calm and measured, but it carried clearly to every single corner of the silent banquet hall. You love to use big financial terms to make my family feel small. So let me explain my current investment strategy to you in very simple terms. When a hedge fund like yours defaults on massive federal loans, the banks look to offload that toxic debt to private equity firms. My firm in London specializes in acquiring highly distressed assets. We look for arrogant, careless men just like you, men who steal from innocent people to fund a lifestyle they cannot actually afford. Preston shook his head violently. No, you cannot do this, he gasped. The federal government was going to offer me a settlement. I had a restructuring plan in place. I was going to pay the church back. I stopped walking and stood directly in front of him. I looked down at his pathetic, trembling form. There is no settlement, Preston, I replied coldly. And there is absolutely no restructuring plan. The banks did not want to negotiate with a thief, so they sold your entire debt portfolio to my acquisitions team for pennies on the dollar. I did not just expose your massive financial crimes today. I legally purchased them. I leaned in closer so he could see the absolute lack of mercy in my eyes. You do not owe the national banks anymore, Preston. You do not owe the foreign lenders or the corporate creditors. You owe me. I am your sole remaining creditor. Every single dollar you stole, every single loan you forged, and every single margin call you missed is now my personal property. And I am officially calling in your massive debt. I am foreclosing on your primary residence. I am foreclosing on your new vacation house in the Hamptons. I am seizing your luxury cars, your bank accounts, and your failing firm effective immediately. Preston let out a pathetic, high-pitched whine. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, completely abandoning any remaining shred of his pride. He reached out and grabbed the hem of my heavy lace gown. Charmaine, please, he begged. Tears streamed down his red face, mixing with the sweat. You cannot take my firm. It is my entire life. I will work for you. I will sign everything over to you and run the daily operations. I know the local markets. I can be a highly valuable asset to your London corporation. Just please do not leave me with absolutely nothing. I looked down at his hands clutching my dress with pure disgust. I smoothly pulled the fabric away from his desperate grip. I do not hire corporate criminals to run my companies, Preston, I said sharply. And you are not a valuable asset. You are a massive liability who stole from elderly widows and manipulated a church congregation to feed your own massive ego. You do not have anything left to offer me. Vanessa, who was still sitting on the floor nearby, watched her husband begging at my feet. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. She realized he was willing to throw everything away just to save his own skin. He even forged my signature, Charmaine, Vanessa yelled through her tears. He ruined my life to save his. Please, you have to believe me. I did not know about the stolen money. I turned my head slightly to look at my sister. Ignorance is not a legal defense, Vanessa, I replied evenly. You happily wore the diamonds and drove the sports cars without ever asking how a struggling local financial manager could suddenly afford a millionaire lifestyle. You looked down on everyone else because you thought your stolen wealth made you vastly superior. You tied your entire identity to this pathetic lying man. Now you get to sink right along with his sinking ship. I turned my attention back to Julian, who was standing quietly nearby. Julian, please inform the federal authorities that our firm will fully cooperate with their ongoing criminal investigation, I instructed. We will provide all necessary financial ledgers to ensure maximum federal prison sentences for both corporate fraud and severe elder abuse. Julian bowed slightly. It will be my absolute pleasure, Madam CEO, he stated firmly. He gestured toward the two tall federal agents standing near the front of the stage. The agents immediately stepped forward to finish the job. They moved quickly and efficiently across the carpeted floor. One agent grabbed Preston by his expensive suit collar and hauled him roughly to his feet. Preston let out a loud, pathetic sob as the agent spun him around and pushed his face firmly against the nearest round dining table. The heavy gold silverware rattled loudly against the fine china plates. The loud metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the silent banquet hall was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. The agent roughly patted down his tailored suit pockets and confiscated his leather wallet and his expensive designer watch. You have the right to remain silent, the federal agent announced loudly, reading Preston his official rights. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Preston continued to cry uncontrollably. The great white savior of our family was finally exposed as a completely broken and utterly defeated man who had lost everything. I turned my back on his pathetic weeping form forever. As Preston was hauled away toward the heavy double doors, his pathetic weeping echoed over the hushed whispers of the shocked congregation. Vanessa remained curled in a tight ball on the floor, shivering in her ruined designer gown. I slowly turned my attention away from the federal agents and looked directly at my mother. Elaine was standing frozen behind the crystal podium. She looked like a woman who had just watched her entire universe burn to the ground in a matter of minutes. The perfect, wealthy image she had spent decades meticulously crafting was completely eradicated. The high society friends she desperately wanted to impress were now staring at her with undisguised horror and absolute disgust. The rich son-in-law she worshipped was handcuffed and headed for federal prison. The golden child she constantly compared me to was a massive federal liability who did not even have enough money to buy a cup of coffee. Elaine looked down at Vanessa crying on the carpet, and then she looked at the heavy silver briefcase Julian was holding. Her eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for any possible escape route from this absolute nightmare. When she realized Marcus was also securely pinned to the floor by my security contractors, her breathing became heavy and erratic. She gripped the edges of the podium so hard the crystal actually squeaked under the pressure of her hands. She was cornered, but Elaine was a highly narcissistic survivor. She would gladly step on anyone to keep her head above water. She stepped out from behind the podium and marched toward me. Her elegant posture was completely gone, replaced by the aggressive stance of a cornered predator. She stopped a few feet away from me, completely ignoring the federal agent standing nearby. "You think you have won, Charmaine?" she hissed bitterly. Her voice was sharp and venomous. "You think because you bought some bank loans and brought these federal agents into my church that you have suddenly beaten me? You are nothing but a vindictive little girl throwing a very expensive temper tantrum." I raised an eyebrow but remained perfectly silent, letting her dig her own grave deeper. Elaine turned to face the crowd, throwing her hands up in the air in a dramatic gesture. "My daughter thinks she is a financial genius," Elaine shouted desperately, trying to reclaim the narrative. "She thinks she has trapped us." But she completely forgot one very important legal detail. I am still the matriarch of this family. I am the only person who holds the legal medical power of attorney over my mother. Grandma Dorothy is legally incompetent, and I have the official court orders to prove it. That means I have total and absolute control over the Fairfield estate and the 300 acres of prime commercial real estate surrounding it. The church elders, who had just discovered the absolute truth about Preston, looked at Elaine with deep revulsion. "You would sell your own mother's home," Elder Thomas asked, his voice dripping with complete disgust. "You would throw her out of the house she built with her own 2 hands." "I will do whatever is absolutely necessary to protect my real family," Elaine snapped back coldly. "Vanessa needs the best criminal defense lawyers in the country right now. She needs cash to settle these ridiculous federal charges that Preston maliciously trapped her in. So yes, I am going to sell the estate. I have 3 different commercial real estate developers who have been begging to buy that land for years. I am going to call the highest bidder first thing tomorrow morning, and I am going to liquidate every single asset my mother owns." Vanessa stopped sobbing for a brief second and looked up at Elaine with a glimmer of desperate hope. "You can save us, Mom," Vanessa whispered weakly. "Of course I can, sweetie," Elaine said, offering her golden child a tight, forced smile. Then Elaine turned her venomous gaze back to me. Her eyes were burning with pure, malicious triumph. And as for the old woman, Elaine continued loudly, making sure every single person in the room could hear her cruel intentions. "I will have her permanently transferred to the state mental facility by tomorrow afternoon. It is the cheapest option available, and frankly, it is exactly where she belongs right now. The Fairfield estate will be completely bulldozed and turned into a shopping mall by the end of the year. You can keep your little debt portfolios, Charmaine. I am going to walk away from this mess with a massive fortune in cash, and you cannot do a single thing to stop me." Elaine crossed her arms over her chest and lifted her chin, staring me down with a look of absolute victory. She genuinely believed she had found the perfect loophole. She thought she was still the smartest person in the room. She expected me to react with sudden panic. She wanted to see me lose my calm demeanor and desperately beg her to spare Grandma from that horrific, underfunded state asylum. She stood there waiting for my inevitable emotional collapse. But I did not panic. I did not scream or beg or negotiate. I simply looked at my mother standing there in her expensive navy blue gown, clutching to her final pathetic illusion of control. And then I started to laugh. It was not a loud or hysterical laugh. It was a slow, dark, and completely chilling sound that started deep in my chest and resonated loudly through the stage microphone. The low, echoing laughter instantly silenced the whispers of the crowd. The federal agents stopped moving. Vanessa froze on the floor. Elaine dropped her arms, her smug expression rapidly fading into deep, uneasy confusion. She had finally made her final and fatal mistake. The sound of my cold, calculating laughter filled the massive banquet hall, leaving my mother completely unnerved and deeply terrified of what I was going to do next. I stopped laughing and let the heavy silence stretch out for a few agonizing seconds. The panic in my mother's eyes was deeply satisfying. "You really think you hold all the cards, Elaine?" I asked softly. "You think you are the only person in this family capable of planning ahead? You underestimated me 5 years ago, and you are still underestimating me right now." I reached into my heavy leather portfolio for the very last time. I pulled out the third and final pristine red folder. Unlike the first two folders I presented earlier, this one did not contain freshly printed bank documents from my London security team. The paper tucked inside this specific folder was thick, slightly yellowed with age, and bound firmly with a heavy blue legal ribbon. I held the vintage folder up high so Elaine could clearly see the official embossed gold seal of the Connecticut State Supreme Court stamped directly onto the front cover. "You mentioned your medical power of attorney, Elaine," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. "You claimed you have total legal control over Grandma Dorothy and her estate. But you are forgetting a very important piece of family history. I want you to cast your mind back exactly 5 years ago. Do you remember the week before I suddenly packed my bags and fled to Europe?" Elaine swallowed hard, her eyes fixed nervously on the blue ribbon. "You ran away because you were a coward," she spat defensively. "You could not handle the pressure of this family." "I did not run away because I was a coward," I corrected her sharply. "I ran away because it was the only way to protect the massive secret Grandma Dorothy and I had just buried." You see, 5 years ago, Grandma had a sudden terrifying moment of absolute clarity. She woke up in the middle of the night and realized exactly why she had been feeling so weak and disoriented for months. She found the crushed sedatives you had been secretly mixing into her evening tea. She knew her own daughter was slowly poisoning her just to steal her land. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd of church elders and wealthy guests. Elaine physically recoiled as if she had been slapped across the face. "That is a complete lie," Elaine shouted loudly. Her voice was shrill and desperate. "I loved my mother. I was caring for her every single day. You were preparing to murder her for prime real estate," I countered coldly. "Grandma knew you were going to lock her away or do something much worse. So the very next morning, while you were out at the country club sipping mimosas, I drove Grandma directly to the state courthouse in Hartford. We met privately with a senior judge who was a very old and dear friend of my late grandfather. We showed him the tampered tea and the medical blood test results we had privately commissioned. The judge was completely horrified by your evil actions, Elaine." I opened the red folder and carefully unfolded the thick, yellowed documents. The heavy vintage paper rustled loudly in the stage microphone. The judge immediately drafted an authentic court-sealed irrevocable trust, I announced, reading the bold legal header for the entire shocked congregation to hear. In this secure document, Grandma Dorothy transferred absolute ownership of the Fairfield estate, the 300 acres of commercial land, and all of her personal financial assets entirely over to me. Furthermore, she legally appointed me as her sole permanent medical guardian. Elaine shook her head violently back and forth. "No," she gasped loudly. "That is absolutely impossible. I have the legal power of attorney. The local county judge signed it himself." "The local judge you secretly bribed with $50,000 signed a completely worthless piece of forged paper," I stated firmly. I pulled out the bank transfer receipt Arthur had sent me and held it up right next to the court-sealed trust. "Your power of attorney is a completely fraudulent document, Elaine. It was quietly filed 3 years after my irrevocable trust was already permanently sealed and registered at the highest state level. My supreme document completely supersedes yours in every single legal jurisdiction. You do not own the large house. You do not own the valuable land. And you certainly do not have the right to send my loving grandmother to a horrific state asylum. You are completely powerless." Elaine stared blankly at the official Supreme Court seal resting on the yellowed paper. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but absolutely no sound came out. The harsh reality of her complete defeat finally crushed her. She had spent 5 long, miserable years drugging her own mother, lying constantly to her family, and manipulating her wealthy friends, all for a financial prize she had actually lost half a decade ago. She had sacrificed her soul for absolutely nothing at all. I checked my silver wristwatch. Right on cue, the rhythmic chopping sound of a helicopter rotor began to echo from outside the grand banquet hall. The sound grew louder, vibrating the crystal chandeliers hanging high above us. "The private medical trauma team I hired from London is landing on the grassy church lawn right now," I announced calmly. "They are going to extract Grandma Dorothy from that dark basement and quickly transport her to a world-class hospital facility where she will be safe from you." Elaine collapsed heavily against the clear crystal podium, her trembling legs completely giving out beneath her. She slid slowly down the smooth acrylic stand until she hit the hard wooden floor, kneeling pathetically in her expensive navy blue designer gown. The magnificent facade she had carefully built over decades was completely pulverized. She was not a wealthy matriarch holding the keys to a massive family empire anymore. She was just a desperate common criminal facing severe elder abuse charges, and she had nowhere left in this world to hide. The federal agents moved with uncompromising efficiency. They hauled Preston up from the table and began marching him down the center aisle of the banquet hall. His gray suit was stained with sweat. He dragged his feet against the carpet, desperately trying to slow down his inevitable exit. He turned his head frantically, searching for his wife. "Vanessa, please." Preston begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "Call my lawyers. Call the bank. You have to help me, Vanessa. Do not just let them take me away." Vanessa remained frozen on the floor. She did not reach out to him. She just stared blankly at the shattered pieces of her cell phone scattered across the carpet. She realized helping him would only pull her deeper into the federal investigation. She turned her back, ignoring his pathetic pleas. Preston let out a loud, agonizing wail as the federal agents shoved him through the double doors and out into the bright afternoon sunlight. On the stage, the two private security contractors hauled Marcus to his feet. His custom Italian tuxedo was torn, and his face was bruised from hitting the hard floor. Two local police officers stepped forward to take custody. They pulled his arms behind his back and secured his wrists with steel handcuffs. "You are making a massive mistake," Marcus yelled, struggling against the officers. "I have powerful friends in this city. You will all lose your badges." One of the police officers laughed and pushed Marcus forward. "Your powerful friends cannot help you when the federal government has your offshore ledgers," the officer replied. "You are going away for a very long time, buddy." Marcus glared at me with absolute pure hatred as they dragged him down the stage steps. He opened his mouth to shout another threat, but the officer pushed him forward, silencing him completely. The congregation watched in complete stunned silence as the wealthy, arrogant real estate developer was marched out of the church in total disgrace. With Preston and Marcus successfully removed from the building, the room felt suddenly lighter. The suffocating tension began to slowly dissipate. I turned my attention back to my mother. Elaine was still kneeling on the floor behind the clear crystal podium. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. Two female police officers slowly approached the stage. Their expressions were completely serious and completely devoid of any sympathy. Elaine looked up at the approaching officers and scrambled to her feet. She held her hands up defensively. "Wait," she stammered, taking a step backward. "You cannot arrest me. I have not committed any financial crimes. I did not know anything about the stolen retirement funds or the money laundering. I am a completely innocent victim in all of this." "You are not being arrested for financial fraud, Elaine," I said, clearly stepping toward her. I reached into my leather portfolio one last time and pulled out a thin, white envelope. I handed the envelope directly to the lead female police officer. "Inside that envelope are the comprehensive toxicology reports from Grandma Dorothy's blood work," I explained loudly. "The private medical team I hired took blood samples last night while you were asleep. The results clearly show massive, dangerous levels of chemical sedatives and strong antipsychotics in her system." Elaine shook her head, denying everything. "She is old and sick," Elaine argued frantically. "Those medications were prescribed by a doctor to keep her comfortable." "They were prescribed by a doctor you deliberately misled," I corrected her sharply. "And you administered them in doses that are legally classified as attempted chemical restraint. You purposefully kept her in a chemically induced coma so you could forge her signature and maintain illegal control over her estate. That is severe elder abuse, Elaine. It is a major felony." The police officer opened the envelope and quickly scanned the certified medical documents. She nodded once and stepped directly up to Elaine. "Elaine, you are under arrest for severe elder abuse, medical fraud, and unlawful detainment," the officer stated firmly. "Please place your hands behind your back." Elaine physically recoiled as if the officer had brandished a weapon. "No," she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly across the banquet hall. You cannot do this. I am a respected member of this community. I host charity galas. I am the head of the church committee. She turned desperately toward the congregation. Pastor, tell them who I am. The pastor simply turned his back and walked slowly away, shaking his head in complete disgust. The wealthy guest who had gladly drank her champagne and eaten her expensive food just an hour ago now looked at her with pure, unadulterated contempt. Not a single person stepped forward to defend her. The female police officer grabbed Elaine's wrists and pulled them behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut sounded incredibly loud in the quiet room. Elaine let out a loud, hysterical sob. Her perfect, elegant persona was completely gone. She was just a terrified, angry woman facing the brutal consequences of her own horrific actions. As the officers began to lead her away, Elaine dug her heels into the carpet. She turned her head and looked directly at me. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "Charmaine, please," she begged hysterically. "I am your mother. I gave you life. I raised you in a beautiful home. You cannot do this to your own family. You have to stop them." I stood perfectly still and looked deeply into her panicked eyes. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt or sadness. I felt only complete, absolute liberation. I stepped closer to her so she could hear my voice perfectly clearly. "You stopped being family the day you put a price tag on my life," I replied coldly. I simply turned my back on her and I walked away from them forever. The heavy wooden doors of the grand banquet hall swung shut behind me, cutting off the loud murmurs of the stunned congregation. I walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The wailing sound of multiple police sirens echoed loudly across the manicured lawns. The parking lot was completely transformed into a staging area for federal authorities and local police. Red and blue lights flashed aggressively, reflecting off the shiny parked luxury cars. I stood silently on the top step and watched the final remnants of my toxic family being systematically loaded away. Preston was shoved unceremoniously into the back of a dark federal SUV, his head pushed down by an agent to clear the doorframe. He was still crying loudly, his expensive suit completely ruined. Marcus was placed into the back of a standard local police cruiser, his face pressed angrily against the thick plexiglass window. Finally, I watched two officers guide Elaine down the concrete walkway. Her hands were cuffed securely behind her back. She kept her head bowed, deeply trying to hide her face from the church members who spilled out onto the front steps to watch her complete downfall. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. She likely fled out the back exit, too humiliated to face the congregation and too broke to afford a taxi ride home. I did not care where she went. They were all completely erased from my life. Julian stepped up beside me, holding his silver briefcase. He offered a polite nod. "I have a luxury sedan waiting for you, Madam CEO," he said smoothly. "The medical extraction team has breached the Fairfield estate perimeter and secured the primary target." I thanked him and walked down the steps, completely ignoring the whispers of the church elders standing nearby. I climbed into the back seat of the black sedan and told the driver to take me directly to my grandmother's house. The drive back to the Fairfield estate took exactly 20 minutes. I sat in the quiet back seat and watched the familiar tree-lined streets of my childhood neighborhood roll past the tinted windows. For the first time in my entire life, I did not feel a heavy knot of anxiety forming in my stomach as I approached the brick colonial house. The invisible chains of obligation and fear that Elaine had wrapped tightly around my neck were completely shattered. We turned up the long, winding driveway. The property looked entirely different now. A massive medical evacuation helicopter sat squarely in the center of the perfectly manicured front lawn, its rotor blades spinning slowly on standby. Two sleek black transport vans were parked near the heavy oak front doors. I stepped out of the sedan and walked right through the open front entrance. The grand foyer was completely silent. The jazz music was gone. The caterers and the party guests from yesterday were completely erased. The only sound was the crisp, professional voices of the private medical team coordinating their extraction protocol. I bypassed the grand staircase and walked quickly toward the servant quarters. I descended the narrow wooden steps leading down into the dark, damp basement. The harsh fluorescent light in the corner was still buzzing loudly, but the terrifying atmosphere of the makeshift prison was completely gone. 5 highly trained medical professionals wearing sterile blue scrubs were gathered around the cheap medical bed. They moved with absolute precision and care. A senior trauma doctor was monitoring a portable heart rate machine, while a nurse gently secured an intravenous line into my grandmother's fragile arm. They were flushing the heavy chemical sedatives out of her system with specialized neutralizing fluids. I stepped closer to the bed, completely ignoring the damp, cold air of the basement. The late doctor looked up and offered a reassuring nod. "Her vital signs are stabilizing rapidly, Madam CEO," the doctor reported professionally. "We successfully administered the counteragents. She is strong. She will be ready for the helicopter transport in less than 5 minutes." I walked up to the side of the bed and gently took my grandmother's cold hand in mine. Her skin felt incredibly fragile, but the deathly pallor was already beginning to fade from her cheeks. The medical team shifted her weight and transferred her smoothly from the cheap mattress onto a pristine transport stretcher. They secured her safely with thick padded straps and began to maneuver the stretcher toward the wooden staircase. I walked right beside her, never letting go of her hand. As we reached the main floor, the bright natural sunlight streaming through the large foyer windows washed over her face. The sudden warmth and light seemed to reach her through the fading fog of the sedatives. Her eyelids fluttered rapidly for a few seconds. Then very slowly, her dark brown eyes opened. She blinked against the bright sunlight, trying to focus her vision. Her gaze drifted lazily around the grand foyer before finally settling directly on my face. A weak but incredibly genuine smile spread across her lips. "You came back," she whispered. Her voice was incredibly raspy and barely audible, but it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I squeezed her hand gently and leaned down close to her ear. "I told you I would never let them hurt you, Big Mama," I said softly, fighting back a wave of emotional tears. "You are completely safe now." The medical team rolled the pristine stretcher out through the heavy oak front doors and directly across the manicured lawn toward the waiting helicopter. I walked beside her, feeling the strong downdraft of the spinning rotor blades against my face. "We are leaving this terrible place," I promised her firmly. "We are going home to London together right now. You are going to get the absolute best medical care in the world, and you will never have to see any of them ever again." Grandma Dorothy squeezed my fingers weakly and closed her eyes with a look of total absolute peace. The medical team carefully loaded the heavy stretcher into the spacious rear cabin of the waiting helicopter. I stood on the manicured grass watching them secure the specialized equipment. The loud thumping of the massive rotor blades whipped my hair violently around my face. I turned around to take one final look at the imposing brick colonial house. The fortress of impossible expectations and emotional coldness that defined my childhood was finally just a building. It held absolutely no power over me anymore. Suddenly, a bright yellow taxi quickly pulled right up to the bottom of the long paved driveway. The driver aggressively honked the horn before speeding away, leaving a solitary figure standing near the heavy iron gates. It was Vanessa. She slowly walked up the winding path toward the helicopter. The glamorous, arrogant golden child was completely unrecognizable. Her expensive silk dress was torn at the hem and stained with dirt. Her bare feet were blistered because she had abandoned her designer heels somewhere along the way. The federal agents had completely stripped her of her diamond tennis bracelets, her luxury watch, and her expensive Birkin bag, holding them as material evidence of Preston's massive financial crimes. She looked incredibly small and utterly broken. Vanessa stopped a few feet away from the spinning helicopter blades. She wrapped her arms around her shivering body and looked at me with red, swollen eyes. "Charmaine." "Please, Vanessa," shouted over the deafening roar of the engine. Her voice was raw and completely devoid of its usual sharp arrogance. "They locked me out of my house. The federal agents seized the keys and changed the security codes. I have absolutely nowhere to go. My wealthy friends will not even answer my phone calls. Preston is gone. Please, you have to help me. I am your sister. Just give me a small loan to get a hotel room until I figure this out. I promise I will pay you back every single cent. I looked at her shivering in the afternoon breeze. I slowly reached into the hidden pocket of my vintage lace gown, where I had stashed my small leather wallet earlier that morning. I pulled out a single crisp $100 bill. I stepped forward and held the green paper out to her. Vanessa reached for it with trembling fingers, a small spark of desperate hope lighting up her tear-stained face. She thought I was finally going to save her from the horrific reality she had proudly helped create. Take this, I said coldly, my voice projecting clearly over the loud engine noise. Use it to call a taxi to the nearest public homeless shelter. Consider it my ultimate sisterly duty. Her face crumbled in absolute horror as her fingers closed around the single bill. She fell to her knees on the hard pavement, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I turned my back on her for the final time and climbed into the sleek modern cabin of the private medical helicopter. The heavy doors slid shut, sealing us inside the quiet, soundproof cabin. The pilot immediately engaged the thrusters, and the massive machine lifted smoothly off the green lawn. I sat down in the comfortable leather seat next to Grandma Dorothy and held her warm hand. I looked out the large, clear window as we rapidly ascended high into the bright blue sky. I watched Vanessa growing smaller and smaller until she was just a tiny, insignificant speck kneeling in the massive empty driveway. We flew swiftly over the sprawling, affluent neighborhoods of Fairfield. Far below us, I could clearly see the bright, flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers still swarming the church parking lot, processing the complete destruction of my toxic family. If you are still watching this video, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Society constantly tells us that family is absolutely everything. They tell us that blood is thicker than water and that we must endlessly forgive the people who share our genetic code, no matter how horribly they treat us. But that is a dangerous, toxic lie designed to keep you trapped in a perpetual cycle of emotional abuse. True family does not constantly demand your silence just to maintain their comfortable public illusions. True blood does not bleed you completely dry to fund their selfish, relentless greed. Sometimes the bravest, most powerful thing you can ever do is pack your bags, walk out the front door, and never look back. You do not owe your abusers endless loyalty simply because they share your last name or your childhood history. You have the absolute fundamental right to reclaim your own narrative. You have the right to build a safe, peaceful sanctuary where you are truly valued and respected. I spent my entire childhood and early adult life desperately begging for a tiny seat at a family table where I was constantly served nothing but disrespect, humiliation, and pain. So I finally stopped begging. I left that toxic environment and I built my own massive table across the ocean. Healing from deep family trauma is an incredibly long and painful journey. There are days when the old wounds still ache and the memories try to pull you backward into the dark. But every single time you choose your own peace over their chaotic demands, you win another massive victory and you step fully into the light. My grandmother is now safe and resting comfortably in a world-class medical facility in London. The people who tried to destroy us are currently sitting in cold, concrete federal holding cells, facing decades of severe legal consequences. They lost absolutely everything because their entire existence was built on a fragile foundation of cruel manipulation and massive lies. The ultimate revenge against those who deliberately try to break you down is always your own unparalleled, untouchable, and incredibly beautiful success. Thank you so much for watching. The compelling story of Maya completely shatters the pervasive societal myth that blood is always thicker than water. Her harrowing experience highlights a deeply painful but incredibly necessary truth. Biological connection never excuses emotional abuse, financial manipulation, or cruel exploitation. We are often conditioned from childhood to forgive our relatives endlessly, carrying the heavy burden of their highly toxic behavior simply because we share a last name or a long history. Maya's family weaponized guilt religious tradition and her genuine love for her vulnerable grandmother to violently trap her. They viewed her not as a cherished daughter or an equal sister, but merely as a disposable pawn to be sacrificed for their own massive greed, criminal debts, and fake social standing. The most profound lesson to extract from her incredible journey is that your personal loyalty should never come at the expense of your own mental peace, physical safety, or emotional sanity. True family is defined entirely by mutual respect, unwavering support, and authentic unconditional love, not by legal birth certificates or shared genetics. Maya did not just survive her suffocating environment. She actively thrived by walking away, securing her absolute financial independence, and firmly refusing to play the assigned role of the submissive victim. She clearly proves that cutting ties with highly toxic relatives is never an act of betrayal or cowardice. Instead, it is an act of profound self-preservation and immense personal courage. You have the absolute fundamental right to completely rewrite your own life narrative. You do not owe your abusers endless chances just because society incorrectly dictates that family is everything. Healing truly begins the exact moment you stop accepting total disrespect masquerading as familial duty. Evaluate the close relationships in your life today, and boldly step away from any table where your fundamental worth is constantly being diminished.